Okay, so the purpose of today's session is to talk about the impact of pass opt-in grades on our CEAS application process. So if you are here today, it means that you are planning on applying to a CEAS major, either for spring admission or summer admission, and UC's pass grade opt-in policies are likely going to impact the decisions you make for your applications. So let's get into it. My name is Corinne Cook. I am an Assistant Director of Advising in the College of Engineering and Applied Science. I advise students in the FEP Freshman Engineering Program, and I also advise any of our transition students, so students outside of CEAS who are hoping to become engineers. The reason I am leading this session today is because I do also oversee the change of major and transition application review process for the College of Engineering and Applied Science. So I have a lot of insight on how we manage pass grades and how it impacts students' applications. And I'm really excited just to make sure that you all feel really, really comfortable with that too. So here's just kind of an overview of how we are going to spend our time. The first thing we're going to do is just a general pass opt-in overview. So I want to give you a little bit of insight about the policy at UC, how that decision is made every semester, and just some of the logistics, how you change your grade in Catalyst and reasons why you would not want to choose a pass grade. Once we kind of cover the university basics about the pass opt-in option, we are then going to talk about directly how it is going to impact our application round and the decisions we make, how we calculate your GPAs for our CEAS application reviews. Then I'm going to open it up to everybody here to ask me questions, and we will hang out until you run out of questions. Knowing that I have time reserved for that at the end, I am going to ask that you do please just hold your questions until we get to that Q&A portion of the program. I do have the chat up, so I will see things, but for the general flow of the event, it'll go better if you just hold your questions until the end. If you are just joining us, welcome. I'm very happy you're here. I want to remind you to go ahead and sign in using the link that is in the chat box and up in the top right corner of the screen. Okay, now that we have all hopefully got our calculators, let's start to cover some of the basics about the pass opt-in policy at UC. So the very first question I want to answer is, what is a pass, a P grade? What does this even mean? How does it operate at UC? So students in some UC programs are going to have the option to convert grades that are a C- or better to a pass grade. So in this scenario, we know that a pass signifies that a student earned a C- or higher in that class. Before we go much farther, I want to talk about what I mean by some UC programs, because this is a really, really important component of this policy. Not every student at UC is going to be able to opt into pass grades. Whether or not you have that option depends on the major that you are in right now during this semester. And if the major that you are in right now during this semester allows you to choose P grades, then you will have the option available in all of your courses, regardless of who taught it. So when we talk about who is excluded, then who are the students who do not have this option this semester? There is a list on the website of all the programs that both do have this option and the programs that are excluded. So there are some commonalities between these that we will continue to discuss, but what I want to point out is you will see a lot of our medical programs, pre-professional programs do not have this option, and that will feed into our reasons later on why a student might not want to choose a pass grade. So make sure that you know whether or not your major, the one that you're in right now, is under the category of included or excluded programs for this semester. Coming back to what is a P grade. So P grades are considered neutral with respect to GPAs. That means that we do not calculate P grades once they are selected into students' GPA calculations in Catalyst or elsewhere. Remember I said earlier, because in this scenario, students have the option to convert grades of a C- or better to a pass grade. What this also means is that you have demonstrated competency in the course, that you have earned a better grade than a C-, and that you are capable of moving into the next course in the series or later courses that require that basis of content knowledge. Over here on the right, you see a screenshot of UC's grade scales. If this is something you haven't seen before, I just think it is a handy website to know about at UC. This is where you can really get an idea of how different types of grades, like a W versus a WX versus a UW, can impact a student's overall GPA calculations. Especially for my first year students, I get questions a lot about, well, what equals a 3.5? So seeing that an A- is a 3.667 and knowing how those calculations function here at UC is very, very important. And what you see here is that pass grades have that NA, a neutral impact on a student's GPA. So that is precisely how it functions after you select it for one of your classes this semester. So why does UC have a P grade policy? And I'm actually going to pull out a direct quote from our website because I think it does a really good job of capturing the reasons that I believe in this option for our students. So UC knows that this semester may have been disrupted due to circumstances beyond your control, and that grades this semester may not reflect your actual learning the way that they normally would. We want to do all we can to respond equitably to the diverse impacts the COVID-19 pandemic is having on all of us as we adjust to new ways of teaching and learning during these extraordinary circumstances. So let's talk about what I've bolded in this quote. These circumstances are beyond your control. You cannot help whether or not your roommate gets sick and you have to go into quarantine. You cannot help if you have to do extra caretaking responsibilities at home because a parent has COVID or is in the hospital. It is not your fault if your professor is out for 3 weeks for a family emergency due to COVID. There are all of these things that are happening in your lives right now that we know are completely beyond your control. And that also means, right, that in a lot of ways, some of your grades have also been beyond your control. The next thing, your grades this semester may not reflect your actual learning. So when we start to talk about how CEAS, the College of Engineering and Applied Science, views the P grade option, I really want us to keep coming back to this idea that we have really incredible, high-performing, amazing, brilliant students who want to be engineers. And even those engineers are not able to perform at their highest caliber this semester. And this is an acknowledgement of that. We want to respond equitably. We know that COVID-19 is impacting every student differently, and that there are some students who are being hit harder than others. And even if you are a student who was able to be your best self this semester, this option doesn't take away from you, because the reality is that there are other students who could not because of the real circumstances of their lives. Finally, we are adjusting to new ways of teaching. And I want to be very explicit about this. This is an acknowledgement that some of these classes aren't going as well as they should, right? Part of a pass grade option indicates not just that students aren't able to learn the way that they always have, but our faculty aren't also able to execute the same standards of excellence in instruction that they would in a normal semester. So come back to this quote and just remember the spirit behind this role. We know it's because this semester has been hard, and we want to make sure that our students are safe and supported, and recognize that, like, we know that you are still great even if this semester got to you. Something else I want to remind you, we went through earlier and talked about the majors that were allowed to choose P grades and the majors that were not allowed to choose P grades. And if you are in a major where you are allowed to choose a pass grade, I want to make sure you understand it is because the faculty in your major, in your college, voted for that decision. Looking more specifically at the College of Engineering, whether you're a student who is currently in CEAS right now, or you're a change of college student and you're transitioning to CEAS, what I really want you to keep in mind is that in the College of Engineering and Applied Science, our faculty All of our folks with PhDs in engineering who teach your classes, who are going to be with you for the next 5 years, they decided that the circumstances of this semester and next semester are extreme enough to warrant this option. So I think we're going to talk a lot about like reasons students don't choose pass grades, the reasons you should think twice about it, what impact it could have on grad school or employment. But if you are feeling doubt about the validity of this is really what I want you to remember, is that like your faculty chose it, and that does matter. Okay, so there are some situations where a student should not use under any circumstances. So I really want to get these out of the way so you know for yourself if this is an option you just need to remove yourself from entirely because it could impact your future plans. So the first situation where students shouldn't use P grades is if they are going to graduate, professional, or medical school, and that graduate education institution requires letter grades in certain courses. When I said that a lot of the excluded programs were in many of our health-based majors, that is because generally medical and professional schools like dentistry, optometry, veterinary school, even things like graduate school for social work require specific letter grades in some of your undergraduate courses. So if you are someone who thinks that you could be on that path in the future, you should really connect with our pre-professional school to see if there are reasons that you should not choose this option if it could harm your application down the line. The next reason that a student would not choose a pass grade is if it's going to impact their money. Some students are on scholarships right now that do have GPA requirements or might even be requiring letter grades. So if you are someone who has scholarship funding, whether it's from UC like Cincinnati or the Global Scholarship, or from outside of UC like a nonprofit in your hometown, a donor from your high school, you want to check those documents and check with One Stop to make sure that choosing a pass grade isn't going to harm your standing with that scholarship. The next reason is that if you are applying to a major that requires letter grades. We may have some students with us today who are in exploratory studies. Exploratory studies are students who are on their way into their next stop at UC. And one of the very important conversations that our exploratory advisors are having with students is if you want to go into nursing, if you want to go into allied health, if you want to go into social work, because these are the programs that excluded students. These are the programs that really care about lettered grades. Those students need to think very, very differently about choosing a path. If you're here, though, it means that you're applying to CEAS, and we're going to talk about this in the next section, but the short thing I want you to understand is that CEAS does not require letter grades for admission to our undergraduate programs. So again, we'll get more into it, but what I want you to know right now is that this contingency will not impact you if you are applying to CEAS and you only ever want to be in CEAS and have no interest in going to medical or professional school, like, again, those examples I gave earlier. The last consideration, the last example where you wouldn't want to choose a P grade immediately is if you're someone who's thinking about transferring to another college or university. We can tell you a lot about how we handle P grades at the University of Cincinnati, but we have no idea how your future college or university thinks about this. So if you do fall into that category, someone who's switching to another university for spring or summer or even next fall, you might want to just contact the office and see if anyone can give you information on whether or not choosing a pass grade could hurt you in the review process. Okay, so let's say you look at these reasons, nothing up there applies to you. Let's kind of talk through the logistics of how you would actually go about changing your grade to a P in Catalyst. So the most important thing to realize is you cannot do this until your final grade has actually been posted. So if you're trying to go into Catalyst right now and change your calculus grade to a pass, but your professor hasn't even posted the final exam, you won't even see this option available. It'll become available as each of those grades roll in. And then it'll stay available until next Friday, December 18th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So the general steps are, you go into Catalyst, you hit that My Academics tile, you go down on the left-hand side to your grades, transcripts, enrollment certificates tab, and then you're going to see an option to view your grades. And this is where you're going to go and eventually be able to view your grades for every semester you've been at the University of Cincinnati. When you go into your fall 2020 semester and all of your grades are posted, what you're going to see to the right-hand side of any class where you earned a C- or better, if you are in a college where you have this option, is a yellow button that says change grade to pass. We're going to watch a really quick video just so you can kind of see what it looks like in Catalyst. But before we watch that, the thing I really want to emphasize is once you click yes, you cannot change the grade back to a letter grade. The only way to do that is by contacting your professor and having them submit paperwork to change it to the university. So please be very careful so that you don't end up in a situation where you're running around trying to get professor signatures to change your grade and all of these other things. Okay, so the video I'm talking about is on that main Pass opt-in policy page. So you will be able to come back here at a later date and watch this video in full if you would like some more information. But we're going to go ahead and just watch the Catalyst demo so you can see what it'll look like on your end.
Log into Catalyst. From your student homepage, select the My Academics tile. Next, select the Grades, Transcript, Enrollment Certification folder located on the left side of the page in the navigation pane. Afterwards, choose the View My Grades option from the folder selection. You will be directed to a table that will show past semesters you have been enrolled in as a student. For this P grade election, you must choose either the spring or summer semester 2020. Once selected, you will be directed to a new page that will display your final semester grades. If a letter grade you receive is a C- or better, then you will have a Change Grade to Pass button appear in the right column of the class grades table for each eligible class. This button will not appear if the letter grade is below a C-, if the grade is I or incomplete, or if the class was a pass-fail class. To change your letter grade to a passing grade, select the Change Grade to Pass for the desired class. You will be presented with a pop-up window and ask if you would like to proceed. At this point, you can elect to stop by selecting No. To move forward, select Yes to confirm the P grade election. Your request to change the grade will be processed immediately. You will be returned to the term's View Grade page where you will see the impact of the change request. If other classes are eligible, you can elect another class to change another grade. Under the class grade table, students will see.
Okay, that's enough of the demo, but we did get one comment in the box asking if I was sharing my screen and another comment. So hopefully you saw that. If not, you're just going to be able to come back to this website after today's session and watch that brief video. All I really want you to do is have a visual on what it looks like and understand the permanence of making that election in Catalyst. Okay, so that really covers the basics of the Pass opt-in policy at UC. Now let's take a closer look at how we are going to manage this during our CEAS application review process. So the really big thing that I want to shout from the rooftops is that the College of Engineering and Applied Science will honor P grades per the decision made by the applicant's home college. What this means is that if your faculty in your major voted yes, that you have the option to choose P grades, regardless of what our decision would have been, it was yes, we have them for our students too, but we honor it no matter what. So as we dig into what that means, what I really want you to understand is we have a very graceful policy about P grades. Our general approach in CEAS when it comes to reviewing applicants with P grades is to do no harm, not cause harm to students who chose P grades because of these really difficult circumstances. So let's break down a little bit what that actually means for us. So when I think about how we do this, how we make our decisions, what this really comes down to for me is, as the team that reviews our applications, it is not our place to challenge or change a decision that was made and voted on by our college faculty. So even if we wanted to look at your original grades, even if we wanted to require letter grades, what we come back to is that our faculty in the College of Engineering decided this for you all, and our only position on this is to get in line basically with what they chose. So what this means is that after students go and select P grades, we will go back in and remove your P grades from our GPA calculations before we issue a final decision. This is what it really looks like to honor the P grades. When you look at our application criteria, so I'm going to pull us over to our main CAS page, and let's look at the change of major, transition, and readmission criteria. There are three big things we're looking at for applicants. Did they pass the minimum courses, and did they meet the GPA for their major? So coming back over to this screen, if you have a P grade, it will fulfill minimum course requirements. That means if the major that you're applying to requires a passing grade in calculus, in chemistry, or physics, and you selected a P in one of those classes, we will count that as meeting the requirements. Next, P grades will have a neutral impact on overall UC and math science GPA calculations. So the overall UC GPA isn't really even something we have control of. We just pull that number from Catalyst. So when you go back in and choose your P grades, your GPA recalculates in Catalyst. That's the number we'll pull for our application review. But we even take it a step further and do the same exact thing in our math science GPA calculations. I do see folks asking questions in the chat, and I'm just going to remind you that I'm going to ask you to hold questions until the very end, just because it's hard to keep up with the chat box and keep a consistent flow. So if you can just hold tight with questions, and I will have space for you to ask them at the end. So going back to that math science GPA calculation, if a student chooses P grades in any class that is counted for the math science GPA, we will go back in and remove those P grades for from our calculations before making a final decision. The other thing you should know for the College of Engineering and Applied Science is that P grades will meet the prerequisite requirements for CEAS courses. So if you took ENED 1100, selected P, a passed grade, you would still be eligible to go on to ENED 1120. So there's some kind of extreme extensions of this policy logic that I think is important to discuss to help students understand like how serious we are about honoring P grades. So let's talk first about like a student who chose P grades for all of their classes. Believe it or not, we've never had this happen. It's never come up, but we do have a scenario and a plan in place if it does. So if we had a first semester student who chose all P grades, they would essentially not have a GPA. They would have a neutral UC GPA and a neutral math science GPA. In that scenario, if it came up, we would actually go back and review that student based on their high school credentials, since we don't have any other data about their grade performance at UC. This could work out really well for some students, like if you had really high ACT scores, a really strong first year application, you were directly admitted to an engineering major, the default to a high school review could probably benefit you. However, if you were a student who was referred to FEP, to a second or third choice major, to exploratory studies, I would kind of treat this as a note of caution to maybe not choose P for everything in the event that your high school criteria doesn't really meet our admission standards at a first year level. The other extension of this is students who have P grades for all of their math and science courses. So let's say a student has a 3.8 overall GPA, but has pass grades in chemistry, chem lab, and Calc 1. That means they would have passed the minimum required courses. They have a passing grade in chemistry and calculus. They meet the overall GPA requirement with the 3.8. And in this scenario, we would actually admit this student. So a student who has a neutral math science GPA, but otherwise meets the criteria, will be eligible for admission to the program, again, as long as they're meeting the GPA for the major to which they're applying. So let's look at a scenario to make sure like we're on the same page about what this means. So together, we're going to look at an exploratory student who applied to computer engineering. Now, an exploratory student follows our change of major, transition, and readmission criteria, which might be a little bit different. Like if you're an FEP student, we have different groups of students with different GPA requirements. For an exploratory student who is applying to computer engineering, they need to have a passing grade in Calculus 1, in chemistry or physics, and then they need to have a 3.0 overall and a 3.0 math science. Again, this would be an exploratory student applying to computer engineering. So let's take a look at their original grades. So let's say December 14th, we go check this applicant, and their overall GPA is a 2.778, and their math science GPA is a 2.852. Right now, that student is not meeting the GPA criteria in either category. But we're not going to send a decision yet. We're just going to hang on to that application. They're not admissible right now, but we're going to wait and see if that student is eligible to choose pass grades, and if they do, how that impacts their GPA. So that's what we did on the 15th. Now we're waiting. The 18th comes and goes. Students choose pass grades. It's Monday the 21st. We're back in the office, and we pull the students' grades and recalculate their GPAs. So let's say the student turned all of those C- and C grades into Ps, and then kept the grades in ENED and in chemistry. Based on how the P grade policy works, the student's overall GPA for the semester increases to a 3.714, and this student would actually have a 4.0 math science GPA, which means in that second round of decisions, probably on the 22nd, this student would get a yes from CEAS Computer Engineering. I mentioned here round 2 on the 14th, the 18th, the 22nd. So let's make sure that you kind of understand where all these dates fall, so you have a clear understanding of what the timeline is for you to get decisions. So grades are due on Monday, December 14th. Once grades come in, what we're going to do is go ahead and review everybody, calculate your GPAs. And the reason we're going to do this is if you meet the criteria based on your original grades, we're going to try to get you a decision as early as possible. So if you are above the GPA criteria, we know that we have space in that major, you'll likely get a decision from us on December 16th saying, congratulations, you've been accepted to CEAS, and that you will just be able to move forward then. We're not going to go back and check students who are accepted in that first round to see if their P grades dropped their GPAs. Mostly because if it did, that was a mistake, and their advisor is going to help them fix it once they're back in the major. So round 1, December 16th is where you're either going to get an email saying, congratulations, you've been accepted, or you're going to get an email saying, at this point in time, we are going to hold your application until after pass grade selections. You will hear back from us again next week. Next week comes around. Again, those pass grades are due at like midnight on Friday the 18th, which means we won't get our hands on them until Monday morning when we're back in the office. So Monday morning, we come in, pool everybody's P grades who's still left in the applicant pool, recalculate all of their GPAs, and then we're going to send out decisions. There are some students whose applications are still going to be held at this point, and this is students who fall just below the criteria for our majors who are willing to consider applicants and admit students who fall below space permitting. So let's say you're applying to computer engineering and you have a 2.9 when you need a 3.0 after past grades. You might get an email from us saying, the department would like to take a closer look at your application because you did not meet the listed criteria, and we will follow up with you in early January with a final decision. So total, we have 3 rounds, enrolling decisions happening from December 16th all the way through January 6th. So more than anything, I want students to understand that the pass option has extended our timeline for reviewing applications a little bit. And even though that might mean that you have to wait longer for a decision, it's a good thing, right? Because we are giving you a chance to hit that GPA with your pass grade selections. Classes begin on January 11th. So I know this might seem like a tight turnaround, and it is, but I just want to make sure you all know that our advising team is incredible. We do this every single semester. And even if you don't hear from us with a yes decision until January 6th, our advisors will get you into all the classes you need for the spring semester. So rest assured that we've got your back and we know how to make this work. No matter which round, you do get a final decision from us. Okay. All right. So this takes us into our Q&A portion. For the Q&A, we're actually going to use a tool called Mentee, just so I can take questions in kind of an orderly fashion. So what you need to do on your end is go to mentee.com. When you get there, it's going to prompt you for a code. You're going to type in that code at the top, 9991706. And what that should do is bring you to a new screen where you can start asking me questions. So I'm going to give these a couple of minutes to start rolling in. As a reminder, if you did not sign in to today's session, if you did not fill out that attendance link, I'm going to put it in the chat box now. All you have to do is open it up, sign in with your UC credentials, and hit submit. While we are waiting for questions to roll in, I am gonna look back up in the chat box to the 2 that were asked there. One of the questions was, will P grade affect the FEP to CAS transition? All of this is the same. FEP students don't have different rules in terms of whether or not they're allowed to use pass grade. So everything we just talked about applies to FEP students. So again, CEAS honors pass grades for every applicant. Pass grades will meet the requirements. They will have a neutral impact on your GPA. So FEP students, change of college students, change of major students can select P grades. Okay, let's go ahead and start tackling some of the questions here. The first question is, how likely is it to meet the requirements, but the major is full? So there's a few different ways I want to tackle this question. The first thing is that we do have some students who have guaranteed admission. So students at FEP, if you hit the criteria, capacity, whether or not a major is full, is not relevant to you. So FEP students, you have guaranteed admission. If you hit the GPA, you can anticipate that you are going to get a yes decision. FEP students are the only students at UC who in CEAS who have guaranteed admission. Else is their decision is typically contingent on this thing we call program capacity. So an example would be in our first year aerospace class, we have room for 80 students. And if we currently have 70 and we accept 10 FEP students, we are at our limit there. So that's a scenario where historically a student could be denied even though they met the criteria because of program capacity. This has been kind of an ongoing challenge in CEAS, but I'm actually pretty happy to tell this group for this round of applications, we're not worried about this. Capacity is not a big concern for us for students who meet the criteria. So again, FEP students are the only students with guaranteed admission. We cannot promise that to anybody else, but I do want change of major and transition students to feel really hopeful that if you're above the criteria, because of how COVID has impacted our enrollment, we are very, very likely to admit those students who meet the criteria. Where capacity is really, really going to come into play this round is for students who fall below the criteria. So for an example, computer science is a major that will allow students to be admitted to the program if they fall just below the listed criteria. However, computer science is very, very full. So if they're in a position one year where they've hit all of those spots in their majors, they might still accept everybody who meets the criteria, but they're probably going to deny everyone who fell below because they just don't have room to take anybody extra. So that's really where this piece about a major being full could become really important for applicants this round. What if I meet all the requirements for the major I applied to, but I get an F in a class for this fall semester? Will I still be accepted? This is such a great question. Thank you to whoever asked it. And I'm even excited to tell you that we have an FAQ that addresses this. So I'm going to take us to our transfer and transition page. If you're not familiar with this page, you haven't read it at night before bed, you can't recite it like the back of your hand, spend some time on this page. We've got a lot of good information on how we process our applications here. Okay, where I'm going to take us is the FAQ page, and I'm going to take us all the way down to the bottom of this list where we're going to find a question that looks very, very similar to the one I just got asked. So I'm admissible to a CAS major, but I have a non-passing grade in a required course. What happens next? If you meet the criteria, and we have space, all of those other things, can't guarantee it. If you meet the criteria, you can still be accepted to a major, even if you have an F in a class that's not required for admission. What would happen though is you would be subject to our CEAS academic action criteria. We have a rule in CEAS that students cannot earn a non-passing grade in a class twice. That means if a student withdraws from calculus and then earns an F in calculus, they have a double deficiency in calculus. In that scenario, they would be dismissed from the College of Engineering and Applied Science. So coming back to our original question, if you are accepted to CEAS this round, but you have an F in a non-required course, something like English, again, you're meeting the criteria, you get a yes letter. What's going to happen a couple of weeks after you get accepted is you're going to get a follow-up email letting you know that even though you've been accepted to CEAS, you're actually being accepted on academic probation because you already have a first deficiency in a course. So if you're accepted to CEAS and you get that letter, what that means is that you have to pass it the second time you take it, or you will not be allowed to continue in this major. So again, we are willing to admit students who have deficiencies on record as long as they're meeting the criteria. However, the second you become a CEAS student, you are subject to that double deficiency rule and your past academic performance is considered. Ooh, I love that question. Thanks again for that one. Okay, will pass option be available next semester as well? So some of you know the answer to this. I mean, you might not know right now. Some of you are in majors where we know the answer to this, and some of you don't know yet. So the College of Engineering and Applied Science actually voted on this option for fall and spring. So if you are in the College of Engineering and Applied Science this semester or next semester, you are going to have the option to switch your grades to a P. Now, there's a lot of rules and exclusions, and the exclusion policy, which programs can or cannot use the option, is very, very specific. So in arts and sciences, for example, it's literally broken down by major. So I really want to remind you the importance of making sure you're coming back to this list every semester to make sure your major voted for this option. My understanding is that CEAS is the only college or one of a few who made the decision to vote for fall and spring. What is more likely, if you're a student who is outside of CEAS, is that your faculty will probably vote next semester to decide what to do for spring. However, we do have that certainty in the College of Engineering and Applied Science that our students, students who are in our majors, will be able to opt in to pass grades during the spring 2021 semester. If we have several letter grades, does the number of P grades taken impact the application decision? So when you all like go home, you're probably at home now. When you lay down tonight, the thing I want you to keep coming back to when you feel anxious, when you feel unsure, when you feel like this option is too good to be true, is that we honor the policy. The policy is written that there is no limit to the number of P grades a student can select. So when the departments actually review your applications, they're not even going to see a course by course breakdown of how many P grades you selected. All they are going to see is your overall GPA and your math science GPA. So coming back to that question, if we have several letter grades, does the number of P grades taken impact the application decision? No, we are not counting. We are not looking that closely. We are checking your GPAs to see if you meet the criteria for admission to our college. When transferring to another major, will they notice if you do a grade replacement to make your GPA higher? Yes. So really quickly, before I go farther on this, I want to make sure I explain what a grade replacement is. Because we do have a lot of first-year students in here, students who maybe don't even know about our grade replacement policy at UC. And I want to make sure we emphasize that grade replacement is completely separate, a different policy than the pass opt-in policy. Grade replacement refers to a very specific scenario where a student earned a non-passing grade in a course, D in English 1001. They take it the next semester, earn an A, and submit a grade replacement application so that only the A appears in their GPA calculation. Undergraduate students at UC are allowed to do this for up to 12 credit hours. So it is a finite resource in a tool for students to use at UC if you do not meet or if you do not earn a passing grade in a required course. Now, coming back to the student's question, if you're applying to CEAS, that's what I assume you're asking, will they notice if you do grade replacement to make your GPA higher? So the answer is yes, we notice. It's actually even built into our CEAS applicant scan. We ask students to self-report whether or not they're taking grade replacements so that we can be sure to only use the higher grade when we are calculating your GPAs. So even though we notice because we want to make sure that we're getting the highest possible GPA for you. So again, when we pitch applications out to the departments, for students who meet the criteria, all we are checking is their GPA. So if you did a grade replacement for Calculus 1, you got an F last semester, you got an A this one, we're only going to be looking at the GPA that results from the A in that class. The time this could matter is if you fall below the GPA. Again, we've got some majors who are willing to look at students who fall below the criteria. And one of the things they're looking at there is kind of like your long-term academic performance. Do you have a steady record of high grades, A's and B's? Or alternatively, do you have a history of improvement? So actually, for whoever this student is, if you took a class and you failed it and then you come back and you get a higher grade, we're actually going to see that as a kind of upward trend in your grade history, and that is something we value in engineering. So yes, we will notice if you take a grade replacement, but again, really, like, do no harm. We're noticing it to your advantage. If we want to replace a grade for a previous course, but it takes a couple days, will you consider the new GPA with a replaced course? So this is I thank you all. I love you. These questions are very good today. This is okay. So grade replacement at UC is actually tricky, and we have something built into our process to kind of account for this question. So grade replacement does take a while to process, especially if you wait until you earn the grade to submit your application. So if you filled out our CAS applicant scan, you're asked in there, are you taking a class for grade replacement? If you say yes, the next thing we ask you is what class, so we know which one to look out for. And the next thing we ask you is, have you submitted the application yet? And if we can verify all of that, we're not going to wait on the university. We're actually going to manually incorporate your grade replacement into our decision making. And then we'll send you a decision that basically says, hi, hello, welcome to the College of Engineering and Applied Science. We are so happy you are here. We manually calculated your grade replacement in order to make this decision, which means that this decision is conditional until you actually submit your grade replacement. So basically, we'll do the math, we'll give you the advantage, but if we come check at the beginning of January and we see that you never submitted that and your grade actually hasn't improved, we would have the ability to rescind your decision. So again, we'll do everything in our power to honor your pass grade. We'll calculate it whether or not it's in the system, but we will be going back to make sure that the GPA that is on record, that our co-op employers will see, that your future department will see, reflects that calculation. I'm in aerospace engineering and I want to switch to mechanical. How will PASS affect that? I'll be honest, this is a question I'm a little confused by. So the thing I want to keep reiterating is it doesn't matter what major you're in right now. If you're applying to a CAS major, honoring P grades, our decision to honor P grades applies to you. So for every single student who is applying to a CAS major, P grades will count for minimum courses, have a neutral impact on your GPA, and meet prerequisite requirements. Again, when you lay your head on your pillow tonight, remind yourself whenever you have doubts that our philosophy is do no harm to students who choose pass grades. What if you originally had the GPA when applying to a new major, but recent classes take it down? Will they take that into consideration? So I think this is a question that is coming from a student who's been at UC for a while. So what I believe that they are saying is when I submitted my application in November, I was meeting the GPA. At the end of summer semester, I was above the requirements. But at the end of fall, my grades are going to drop below them. We're not looking at anything that happened before grades come out this semester. We are calculating your grades, where they stand at the end of the semester, and that is how we make our decisions. So to come back to this original question, if I understood it correctly, if you originally had the GPA when applying and then your GPA dropped this semester, if you no longer meet the criteria, it is very unlikely that you are going to be accepted. If we choose to have only a few classes to pass, like in the example during the presentation, will UC look at the updated GPA for renewing scholarships next year? So remember that this is one of the scenarios where a student should think twice about using pass grades. So if you are a student who has a scholarship, your academic advisor has no business answering that question for you. We don't know. The only people who know how your scholarships are going to be impacted are the people who are in charge of your scholarship. So it is very, very important that you're contacting UC Global, that you are contacting Cincinnati, that you're going to One Stop and asking that question, because it is dependent on the individual scholarship, and it is not communicated outside of those financial representatives. So it even wouldn't be appropriate for me to try to answer that question. I don't know. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, can we replace a previous grade with a P? So I want to take us back to that conversation we were just having about grade replacement. If you are a student who earned a non-passing grade in a class in a previous semester, you got an F in English. You took it this semester, you submitted a grade replacement application, and then you selected a P. P grades cannot grade replace previously existing grades. So in this scenario, you would actually still have an F and a P on your record. So if you've already made this mistake, you should be contacting your professors, but know that it is written into the policy that a P grade cannot be used through UC's grade replacement policy to replace a earned letter grade. Cool. So for the math science GPA calculator, it asks to click the calculate GPA, and I'm willing to bet this depends on where you have it open. So if you just have this open here, you cannot use it. Remember, you need to click the download button. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. You're just watching my face as I talk about this. Sorry. Okay, coming back over here. So this is what I think the student in this question is looking at. You can see there's like no place to click the button, but that's because you cannot use it in this format. You actually have to download it onto your computer and then open it up. So let's go ahead and open one up to look at together. Okay, when you open this calculator, there are two things that you are going to have to do. Too big, too big. First thing you're going to have to do up here at the top is hit enable editing. And then the other thing you need to know about this is it was created in Visual Basic, which means you also have to enable macros so that it can function properly. So after you hit enable editing, you also hit enable content, and that is what allows us to use this calculator. So let's run through an example just so you can kind of see how things go. Okay. So let's say this student, that's a bad example. We'll make that a C minus. So if this student switches both of these C minuses to update GPA calculations, so there are their grades, their math science GPAs with these numbers. And then we actually have a P option in the math science GPA calculator. So you can even just select or type in P from that grade list. And that's where you can see it'll recalculate, removing the P grades from the GPA. That overall GPA calculator, that one's a little bit different. There's actually not a P grade option on this one. So like if I'm trying to figure out with a student how a P grade will impact their overall GPA. So let's say these are their classes and the class that they're going to pass is English. Right now, a student has a 3.533. And remember, passes are just removed from the GPA calculator, so calculation. So we can actually just delete that here. And that's where you see the student would have a 4.0 if they turned that English class into a pass. So a little bit more than I think that person asked for, but hopefully gives you a better idea of how to use those calculations to figure out what's going to make the most mathematical sense for you here. Okay, at this time, there are no questions from the audience. I'm going to leave that up for a second, just in case you still have questions that you want to ask. If you're still in here and you haven't signed in, I want to remind you to go ahead and do that. And then there's actually two questions that haven't been asked that I would like to address. The first question comes down to this thing we do with our math science GPAs called a best attempt. So this would be really important for a student who maybe took calculus as a dual enrollment student. Like let's say you took calculus in high school at Sinclair and you got a C minus. Let's say that you weren't super happy with that grade. You decided to retake that class at UC and you took a pass grade. When we calculate your math and science GPA, part of what makes our math and science GPA calculation unique is that we do look at your transfer grades. So with our math science GPA, when a student has two grades in the same course, our approach is to take the best attempt. What a best attempt means is, so let's go back to this student. The student has a C minus in calculus, or the student has a P, a pass grade in calculus. If the pass grade is going to result in a higher math science GPA, that is what we will use in our calculations. That is what we consider the best attempt. And even if you're on our math GPA page, this is actually addressed down at the bottom. So P grades and AP credit will have a neutral impact on students' math science GPAs when they can be considered as the best attempt, meaning that the P grade results in a higher math science GPA than the earned letter grade. So this is really important for students who are retaking classes, have multiple grades in a course. I think it is one of the nuances of our policy that students might not always realize apply to them, especially if you're someone who has AP credit and retook a class at UC and maybe didn't do as well. This is part of our process that would really work to your advantage. The other question I haven't been asked is about how employers might think about P grades. I'm actually surprised because this comes up every time I talk to engineering students. And honestly, what I want you to know is that there's not a right answer to this one. I do really encourage you, if you're trying to decide whether or not to use a P grade, to consult everybody in your network. Reach out to a co-op advisor to see how employers feel about it. Talk to students who selected P grades over last spring and summer, see if it's impacted their co-op search at all. Something that is generally true is that the only time an employer is ever going to see that you selected P grades is if that employer requests a transcript. There's a lot of people who will tell you that when someone is looking at your transcript and they see a P, folks might kind of automatically assume that that was like a C grade. It may not be fair and it may not be true, but it is part of the perception of a P grade. So that is something we want students to know, right? Like if an employer pulled your transcript and saw P grades, would you be able to explain that decision to them? Now, the point that I think I like to make is it's not super common for employers to ask for transcripts, and when they do, it is typically at an employment verification stage. So what this means is usually when someone is asking for your transcripts, it's because they want to hire you and they want to make sure that you are not a fraud and you actually earn the degree that you said you earned. The exception to this would probably be government jobs. Like if you ever see yourself working in a government position, I think those are scenarios where there is a little bit more scrutiny on students' college transcripts. But by and large, I want you to know that even though there are perceptions of P grades, the majority of people in your academic and early employment career are only ever going to see your overall UC GPA. I think you should consult people in your life. I think that this is a very individual decision. I don't think there's a right answer. And if someone in your life tells you that there's a right way to do this, maybe don't trust them because there's a lot of opinions on this. And I think what you all need to do as students is take in all of that information and make a decision that is best for your individual circumstance. Okay, let me take one more look at our question box. There's another question in this, the box about scholarships, and I'm just going to remind you that I cannot talk to you about scholarships. Your advisors cannot talk to you about scholarships. If you have questions about how your scholarships are going to be impacted by P grades, you must contact the scholarship representatives directly or go to One Stop to figure out what those next steps look like. We are at time, so I am going to go ahead and wrap us up. If you filled out the sign up link, I will email you with a recording of this session. And as a reminder, I'm also going to work early next week to get added to our FAQ page. My name is Corinne Cook. I'm going to drop my email in the chat box. It is pattercc@uc.edu. If you do have any other questions that were pretty personal, pretty individualized, you just didn't want to ask in the group space, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and call this a wrap. Thank you all for spending your morning with me, and please take some time to relax. It's your winter break. Goodbye.